and hopefully raise the standard, raise the bar for our industry a little bit. One of the things you'll learn is that we're going to be focused on practice here. We're going to talk a lot about practice and how much it helps, and I'm experiencing that right now. Forgot to reset my slide deck, and now I will get you guys into the slide here momentarily. So this is being hosted by the JTC 27, or the Joint Tech Committee. The people presenting today are myself and then Jeff Onsrud from CR Onsrud, David Biggs from the Woodworking Network, as well as Brendan Linehan from the Woodworking Network, Stephen McNeely from Sheffla, Samantha Devine from the WMMA, and Larry Hoffer from the WMIA. And the Joint Tech Committee is, for those that aren't familiar with us, is it's a committee that's comprised of members from both associations, both the WMIA as well as the WMMA. We have a chairman from each association. Jeff is the chairman for the MMA, and I'm the chairman for the MIA. And then our task is really to present technology to the members of the associations that is impacting manufacturing today or in the future. That's the manufacturing of our customers as well as the manufacturing that we do for ourselves. The agenda for today is I'm going to start out talking about how to set your goals for your events and to prep work and practice. Stephen's going to talk a little bit about choosing the right platform. And then Brendan and David will talk a lot about the technology involved with it, whether it's the sound, the lighting, the video. And then Jeff's going to follow up at the end and along with David, and they're going to get some of your questions answered and talk a little bit about what's next for our committee and what's next for our industry. So if you do have questions, I would ask you to put it in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end. And so starting out, your goals. I have a saying I say a lot. It's Stephen Covey is where I heard it first, and a lot of my mentors say it, begin with the end in mind. You can't set a direction or a plan until you know where you're going. So these events are a lot of work. As a lot of you probably already know, they are a ton of work. And so why are we doing it? What are we hoping to achieve by going through all this work? And then who is our audience? Who are we really doing it for? Is it a particular product group? Are we looking just for cabinet makers? Are we looking for furniture guys? Are we looking for door manufacturers specifically? It's always good to think about that. And then how long do we need to accomplish our goal? How long do we have? Can a customer really sit on a virtual event for more than 45 minutes, an hour and a half? That type of feeling. So what do we want them to feel when they leave? Are they excited about working with us? Are they excited about the technology that we're using to just even present a machine to them? Do they feel like we're pushing the boundaries of the technology? Do they feel like we're kind of just lost without direction? And then what are the metrics that we care about? Are we paying attention to who's attending? Are we paying attention to the sales that come from it? Are we paying attention to the leads that are created by it? One part of preparing and planning and practicing is using storyboards. You've probably seen that analogy before. I like to use the word navigation maps, like a website has. I like to take, this is the one we did, this one you're looking at on the screen is the one we did for this actual presentation. I break it down by the minutes, and then what's the topic, who's owning that particular section of it, and then the actual, I'll actually break it down to the individual slides that I want to include, and any notes, corrections, things like that. And then lastly is prepare, plan, practice. So practicing is, I'm sure a lot of you are in the middle of this right now, trying to get ready for your virtual events. Practice is the only way you're going to get this right, because what happens when, what happens if the Wi-Fi goes out for our sales guy who's in another state? What happens if the machine we're going to do the demo on has an issue? What happens if somebody forgets to turn off their mute, right? And you hear the rest of their conversation. So practice is the only place we're going to have to simulate those events. happening, and the only way we're going to be able to address how to handle them when they come up. And then practicing your handoffs. A lot of the technology that Steven's going to talk about, there's different buttons, different ways to share different parts of your screen. And then one of the big ones is practicing your Q&A, practicing your questions and answers, because it's the only way we're going to be able to engage with our clients, our prospects, and that engagement is really what we're looking for. It's one thing to sit here and I'm talking and I have no idea whether you all are actually listening to me or not, versus when I'm in an office, I can feel what the customer's thinking and I can understand, and I know whether I'm connecting or not. In this situation, you're really lost. So finding ways to use that Q&A to make that connection is crucial. And my last tip before I hand things off to Steven is make sure you just go back to that things happen is a battery power pack for your phone. If you're using your phone for a live stream event, always making sure you have backup power for that. That's my tip.
Good tip. All right. Thanks, Jason. Again, my name is Steve McNeely, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the possible platforms that are available for different formats of virtual meetings. There's many different programs available on the market. You hear all kinds of names: Zoom, GoToMeeting, WebEx, Google Meet. It's endless. And each of these fall into different categories or formats of virtual presentations. And amongst these, within these formats, each of these programs has their unique advantages and disadvantages. For our industry, for what we do day to day, most of the companies that are members of the WMIA or WMMA, these three formats that I've mentioned are probably going to be the more common ones, or the ones to start looking at. The first one is a virtual meeting, and these are probably what most people are used to dealing with every day. As companies have gone remote and everybody's had to shift their everyday office operations and everyday customer interactions to these virtual formats, these virtual meetings are the most common. They're a smaller number of attendees. They're more collaborative. There's no one set presenter, so to speak. Everybody's just sort of free to talk amongst themselves and share ideas and interact with each other as they normally would around a table in a room, for example. Some really common platforms that you've probably heard of or dealt with, and not to say that these are the ones you should use, but just to start your investigation. Zoom is very common. We're actually using Zoom today. Skype for Business, Google Meet. Those are three very, very common ones on the market. Tips for virtual meetings. A lot of the virtual meeting platforms advertise that they can accommodate 150 participants, and that's nice, but in a virtual meeting format, they're really geared and they run better with smaller groups. My next slide, you get to a situation where you've got 30 different faces on your screen, microphones muted and unmuted. There's a lot of back chatter. There's a lot of screen shifting. It's a lot more difficult to manage a format like this. If you're going to have to manage a situation like this, then it may be a good idea to designate an organizer or a moderator, or somebody that can make sure that the microphones are muted, or that the right screens are being shared, or can manage a chat screen or something like that to communicate with the members of the meeting without having to interrupt the primary communication flow. A lot of these platforms also have settings that allow you to adjust how a meeting's going to run. Maybe you start the meeting and everybody's muted, or nobody can show their video feed. So take advantage of all those features and really explore the capabilities of these different platforms, so you can make sure that your meetings are set up to be optimal for what you're trying to get out of the program. And all these programs offer free trials. So before you invest in one and really jump in with both feet, try them out, see which one works best for your needs and which one's going to work best for your company. A webinar, another very popular format, what we're doing today. In a webinar, they're generally geared towards more of a presenter seminar application. So you could have many attendees, but very few presenters. They're not as interactive, but they are better for presentations, because you have a restricted number of video windows, you have, you don't have the opportunity for multiple microphones being active at the same time. And generally these programs will accommodate over 150 attendees. Again, some examples of some platforms you've probably heard of: Zoho, GoToWebinar, Zoom Webinar. These are all good programs, but again, do your research and figure out what's going to work best for you. Some tips for running a webinar: a moderator in a situation like this is critical. We have one running our chat box right now for our Q&A. They can alert the presenter of questions and inform of any feedback, because as Jason said, a webinar is very difficult to do with respect to presenting to an audience. In a personal face-to-face situation, you can take visual cues from your audience and see if they're engaged. You can make eye contact and get feedback that way. In a webinar, you don't have that opportunity. So it's important to be able to have that moderator give you feedback and tell you how things are going, or kind of guide you in the direction of the presentation. Again, try these before you buy them. They all offer free trials, so find the one that's going to fit your needs. And again, practice this. As Jason said, it's critical. Become familiar with the environment, become familiar with the program, the handoffs, how you're going to handle situations should they arise. All these are very important to have a successful webinar. And the third format that we've started to see a lot of in our industry, a lot of the associations and the shows have shifted to an online trade show format. This is a mixing bowl of multiple formats into one. These are generally much larger events planned far in advance. They've got a lot more elements to them. You can have webinars, you can have face-to-face meetings that you schedule with exhibitors, you can have online content and media that's available for download by your attendees. So there are a lot of different formats that come together in an online trade show. Because of this, they do require a lot more planning, a lot more coordination. And in a situation like this, you may be advised to have a project manager dedicate time to planning an event like this to make sure it all comes together. Some common platforms, Expo, vFairs, and Hexafair are all some of the bigger, more common online trade show formats.
Thank you, Steve. So we're going to talk at a high level about some of the hardware involved, and that includes video, lighting, and sound when setting up these presentations and running them. And I know that everybody here should be familiar with webcams, for example, on a laptop. And if you weren't before, you certainly are after these last couple months and all of the Zoom meetings and webinars that we've all been involved with. But there is a lot of quality that can be lacking from webcams on laptops. And what if you're attempting to film someone else, or a demo of a machine, or moving around in a space? It's not really very efficient or practical to use a laptop and carry that around with you. So we have another device that all of us have in our pockets most of the time, or all the time, which is your iPhone or your Android mobile device. And those, at least the ones over the past 3 or 4 years, are now filming in 1080p or 4K in some cases, and some pretty good HD video. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can use those devices. And I'm sure that most of you, if you're doing demos, are probably already using your phones for those things. But there's things that can improve the quality that you're already getting from those devices. Second is a GoPro, or kind of a consumer level secondary device that you can use to stream your video. And those have even better quality than the phones, although sometimes they're a little bit more difficult or complex to hook up to streaming software through a PC or through your phone, or sometimes if they're a newer device, directly through that device. And then we have professional camcorders, which can cost anywhere between $1,000 and $20,000, that can be held on your shoulder, or they can be held right in front of you. And those would be the highest, representing the highest echelon of the hardware that you can purchase. But we don't often see them in our regular demos, because they require teams of people generally to set those up and understand how those all work. So let's go ahead and move to Brendan, who's going to tell us a little bit about some accessories that you can purchase for these devices.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that you can do that improves your video quality pretty much immediately is adding stability to your shots. So that's a tripod for something that you might not be moving around for, or a gimbal where you might be walking around a trade show or following your subject around. And then another accessory that you can add, some of the cameras that are involved on smartphones may not have an appropriate lens, or you wanted to zoom in a little bit more than you might be able to, so you can put these attachments on. Yeah. So for lighting, the next step in improving your video quality, the diagram here shows the basic setup that all lighting is based on. So to your left, you have the key light, and this light will provide most of your light on your subject. To the right is the fill, and that creates a little bit of shadow and definition to your subject. And the backlight separates your subject from the background. Now you can get elaborate as you want. So you can increase the amount of lights that you want, or you can decrease it back down to just the key light. But the key light is clearly key, so you can just stick with that. So another improvement is the background. You want to avoid harsh light because you're going to be putting direct light onto your subject. So if you have too much light going on, then your camera will just read that as too much light, and it won't separate your subject from the background. If you keep it interesting, meaning put something other than a white wall or an office, if you're doing a demo for a machine, put the machine in the background. Or if you're at a trade show, use the trade show as a background. Be intentional with your background as well. So if you aren't talking about a CNC machine, there's no need to have a CNC machine in the background. If you're talking about cabinets and you have chairs, things like that. And then angles are important, that you don't just film flat, especially up against a wall. You want to maybe tilt the wall or tilt against the wall, so that, the wall will then run in a diagonal in the shot. So things like that are important. Other things to consider, these are all guidelines. So if you can't put every single one of these into your video, that's okay. Putting any one of these will improve your video by much more than just holding a phone and following somebody around. The camera settings as well, even on the iPhone or an Android, they have white balance settings and autofocus settings that you can adjust to help with lighting without adding any additional light stands. Evaluate the light in your space so that, if you can turn off overhead lights and add additional light that you can control, that will greatly increase your chances of having good light, good lighting. Also experiment with these. If you have too many lights and it doesn't look good, then take lights away. Or if you don't have enough lights, add more lights. Turn off the lights, turn on the lights. Experimenting is key. And then finally, you have to ask yourself how many technicians it takes to change a light bulb.
Thank you, Brandon. So when discussing sound quality for video presentations, the biggest issue is thinking that it's good enough in quotations. And sure, the video, phone, or camera that you're using can pick up audio, but it won't be as clear and precise using those built-in mics on those devices as what you can achieve with a little bit of equipment and a little bit of planning. Some of the important areas to focus on are the specific kinds of microphones that you may need depending on where and how you're recording, how to position the mics to get the best possible sound quality, and then how to analyze and understand the space that you're going to be recording in to remove as much ambient noise as possible if that's what you want, or to display it if that's what you want in the background, and also to provide a good listening experience for your audience, because that's the only way they're going to keep coming back and be engaged in your presentations, is if you provide them with a good experience. So let's talk about the microphone equipment briefly. Lots of different kinds of microphones are available that you can use if you want to branch out from your existing built-in, which I highly recommend. Let's talk about wired and wireless lavalier mics. Those mics are very inexpensive. You can buy them just from Amazon for $20 in some cases, and they really provide great quality and a huge boost from your existing tech. Mostly because if we are presenting in a warehouse or on the shop floor or at a trade show or with multiple people, there's always going to be a lot of background noise. And so those are going to be right here under the neck. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. But they can pick up the audio really great, and they're not obstructive, and they're not very expensive. You have handheld mics, which I personally, I like the brand Shure, but there's so many of them out there that you can use. And those are your traditional microphones that you're holding right in front of your face. There's also attached mics that can attach directly to a device, for example, a GoPro or an iPhone, and those often come with things like windscreens that we'll also touch on in a moment. You can see a picture right there of an attached mic. Those are pretty easy to use, and they're going to be omnidirectional in most cases, which means that they're capturing the audio from the sources all around you, not just directly in front. So if we can move on to the next slide. Positioning the microphone is super important, and here's a couple of tips for you to use. If you're using a lavalier mic, which are the ones that you pin onto your shirt, for example, they should always be right under your neck. So they should not be lower than that. They should not be down further on the chest or off to the side. They should be right under the neck, as close as you can get to that as possible. If you have a handheld mic, for example, there's a rule called the clenched fist rule, and that's pretty self-explanatory, right? You would just place a clenched fist between your mouth and the air, and that's where the mic should be, which is generally 4 to 6 inches from your mouth. You do want to get pretty close to the mic, and one interesting tip to tell people, and you may have experienced this if you were speaking at a public event, for example, at a podium, and that is that there will be feedback occasionally, depending on how everything is set up. And most people's reaction when they get feedback is to pull back, but that's not actually what stops feedback. That creates more feedback in some cases. So just so you know, if you are using a handheld mic and it starts to feedback, you actually bring the mic closer to your mouth, which is something that prevents the feedback loop. The problem is when the mic is pulled away or you pull away from the mic, the ambient noises in the room are what causes more feedback. Doing a sound check is a very important thing as well to mention. So as we continue to talk about practice, experimenting with lighting, doing the sound check is super important to make sure, of course, that things sound good before you begin. So understanding the space, if we break down what sound is like on a percentage basis, 50% of overall sound comes from the source, where that is just the speaker, the person who's directly speaking into the microphone like I am now. 20% comes from the position of the mic, whether it's tilted or you're speaking directly into it, if it's far away or close to you. 10% comes from the microphone choice itself and the characteristics that are lent to the audio from the mic. And then 20%, the last 20% of the sound comes from the environment and the room that you're in and the ambience of that room. Now you can mitigate some of this stuff. So it's very easy to buy a $2 windscreen, for example, which can go right over a handheld mic or a lavalier. And that's going to not only prevent plosives, which are a hard P or a B sound into the mic, but also prevent any kind of wind from outside or a lot of various outside external ambient noises outside of your little circle that you're in. Preparing the room can be very specific. If you're in a conference room or a contained room, you can do things like putting acoustic foam on the wall to get rid of some of the reverb that might be in the room. But if you're in a larger area like a shop floor or a warehouse or a trade show, there's not much that you can do besides using the specific microphones and microphone positioning that we talked about. And the last tip that I have is not to touch the mic while recording ever, because so many people want to adjust things and fidget with things and play with things. If you have a handheld mic or a lavalier mic and you're touching it with your fingers or your hands, it's going to create large booming sounds on the presentation. And that's the biggest thing maybe out of all this that we want to avoid. What's your reaction when you're listening to a webinar or a podcast or anything else and there's a huge booming sound right in your ears? Sometimes if you've got headphones on, your reaction is to turn it off. So additional resources that we have available here: how to create a live stream on your phone, on a GoPro, with a camcorder. Like I said, some of these can be complicated. On a phone, you might just have to connect to Zoom and hit record. And that's great. But if you have a professional camcorder, you may need to connect to a PC, have special software for your PC, etc. And you may not be able to do that the first couple times you do a presentation. But if we're getting in the habit of doing these things more often and at higher quality, then I can certainly see the hardware that you're using being upgraded. I also included here a couple of links on iPhone filmmaking gear, which represents not only lighting and sound, but also the tripods and gimbals and lenses that we talked about earlier, and some links for proper workspace lighting or presentations, and microphones that are best for the iPhone that also work for the Android in most cases, and GoPros. And I'll hand it right over to Jeff.
Wow, thanks, Jason, Stephen, David, and Brendan. Those were some great tips and presentations and resources. I think there's a lot of great content there for everybody to follow up with. If everybody wants to go ahead and look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there is a Q&A button. If you want to click in there and ask any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the question box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. I want to talk about what we have coming up next for the Joint Tech Committee JTC 27. So IWF Connect, if you haven't heard about it, it's a online trade show. Basically, they're going to be bringing in manufacturers and educational seminars, live demos, and a whole lot of really great stuff. It'll be happening October 26th through 30th, and everything will go live on the portal starting September 1st. So keep an eye out for that. We'll push out some more information related to that, and help facilitate a training demonstration that's related to the IWF Connect. I think it's gonna be a really great event that you're not gonna wanna miss. What else we have coming up is we're looking to do a couple other JTC 27s. These all come from feedback from you. So please, first off, you'll be getting a survey after this. Fill out the survey, let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you would like us to do a topic on. What we have slated up as our next couple of topics is productivity software and tech travel, or travel tech, sorry. With productivity software, we'll be looking at things like Slack and Trello and some of these kind of in-between softwares that can kind of help you be more productive in your general workday. And with travel tech, it would be mostly about gadgets that you can use on the road. So now we'll jump over to the Q&A. I don't see anybody that's put much into the Q&A box, but there's a few coming in via the chat.
Jeff,
so we'll look at those.
I did have a question that came in via email earlier today that I could handle real quickly.
Yeah, please.
So I think Larry forwarded it over to me, but the question was about sound. If we should, if you wanted to, on the shop floor, for example, have some of that ambient noise from a machine, say you wanted to feature an edge bander or some kind of machine, and you wanted to hear it as well, should you be getting more mics for those kinds of circumstances? And then also, if you had more than one speaker, how do you handle that? And the answer is yes. You can set up a mic on a tripod and put it directly next to a machine. I would suggest 3 to 6 feet away. And getting a microphone that is a cardioid mic instead of an omnidirectional mic. And what that means is that it will only take the sound that's in front of it rather than all around it. The last tip related to that is that if you have multiple mics, you're going to want to buy some kind of a mixing board so that you can plug them all in and have one output that goes back into your computer or your device when you're streaming. So if you have any specific questions around those kinds of setup ideas or issues, then you can email me directly. I'll be happy to help you out with that.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Great answer. And we do have a few more questions coming in here, so I'm going to jump over to those. We have met our 27-minute timeline, so stay on if you can, please, and we'll go through the questions as they come in. So I know we kind of want to stay away from specific recommendations. We're not trying to endorse anything, but we did have a question that said, hey, what about a recommended setup? Go buy this kind of camera and this kind of mic, and and you're kind of off to the races with a basic setup. Does anybody want to maybe start with a basic and maybe an upgraded setup?
Sure. So a basic setup for us is going to look like an iPhone with maybe a lavalier mic that you have connected, and hopefully you have some kind of lighting that's built into your space, or you purchased maybe one key light or something like that that you can use to illuminate your subjects. But a more advanced setup could still use a mobile device like that without costing thousands of dollars, just upgrading it with better lenses, more lighting, and better external microphones, and having someone there to help you do and adjust the lighting and sound as you progress would be, I think, my recommendation for a more advanced setup. Now, if you wanted to get all the way there to broadcast studio quality, then you have to spend the money to buy that $3,000 camera. And along with that, I mean, you should go through training, et cetera, to be able to support how to use that kind of expensive equipment.
And I think the question, they were hoping to get a few names, but again, with the JTC 27, we don't really want to endorse any one brand or the other. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There's some good resources that were already linked in one of the previous slides. You fill out that survey, you'll get a link to the slides, and you can check those. And of course, there's a plethora of 10 best everythings out there. I'm gonna jump on to the next question that was chatted in. Has anyone used Zoom video webinar? Which webinar software is best? Again, we're gonna try our best not to specifically endorse one because there's so many great ones out there, but I think all of us on this platform probably have used about everyone out there, and you know that the big names, they're all good for a reason. If anybody has any specifics that they wanna jump in and highlight anything about the differences maybe between one or two.
As far as the differences, I mean, they all have a basic feature set. You know, we're using Zoom right now, for example, and I think the more important thing is to not necessarily look. It's important to look and try to distinguish between the different webinar software offerings, but it's more important to make sure that you're working with a platform that's specific to your needs. Is it a virtual meeting? Are you going to be doing a machine demonstration? Are you going to be doing a webinar? So I think that's going to, you know, making sure you're focusing on the right platform is going to be more important than specifically, you know, recommending one specific webinar versus another, webinar program over another. But as we said earlier, just try them. Most of them offer free trials. Look through the features, play with them, practice with them, do a couple test runs with some employees, and you know, figure out which ones work best for you.
One other tip on that is pay attention to how your attendees, whether they need to download software or if it's just simple as a web window. It's just, you know, understanding it's the one thing how you use it, and then also pay attention to how your attendees are using it too. Because one of the reasons why we did like Zoom is because it was easy for everybody to get up and running. So, yeah, but that's not an endorsement. It's just why we're using it. So.
Great. Thank you, Stephen and Jason. I think that's some great info. Up next, any tips on how to smoothly transition between talking and video?
Yeah, so surprisingly, this question's just a little bit vague just because there's so many different ways that you can distribute your video. If you have an editing software, there's built-in transitions in the editing software where you can easily do a crossfade from a B-roll to someone, you know, speaking in an interview. Some other techniques are to overlap the audio with the B-roll. So if you're scanning through a shop, you can just have the person continue to talk underneath that. As for webinars, I mean, it just kind of goes from one to the other. But yeah, editing software is where that will come into play.
One thing I want to add to that is with a webinar, webinars are always thought of as being live, but they can be pre-recorded as well. And so a webinar, today's webinar could have been completely pre-recorded and we just play it and then do a Q&A session towards the tail end. And if you want to have a very intricate webinar with a lot of transitions and a lot of changing shots, you know, an alternative or an option may be to pre-record and edit it beforehand and then present that as your webinar as a pre-recorded format instead of a live format.
Well, I will add to that, when you're doing the video, it's also James Scarlett wrote in a good helpful hint here that we'd forgotten to mention was pay attention to your upload speed, especially when you're talking about the videos and having videos, because I'm sure you've all seen how it can get choppy. So that's another helpful
Yeah,
tip.
and a lot of these platforms have, you have the option to upload pre-recorded content as well. So then when somebody's watching a video, you cue a video, but it's streaming from the provider's server, and it's not a screen share of your computer going to a server then going back out to the attendee. So it's going to be a lot cleaner, a lot more smooth. You're not going to have any kind of lag.
Awesome, great tips. And one more to add to that is, by default, most of these, whoever's talking, it automatically spotlights. But if you want to force a spotlight in most of these softwares, you can essentially right-click or click on the tile of the person and force that as the spotlighted video, which basically means the one that everybody will see. So let's say you want somebody to stay in shot while something else maybe is happening that sometimes it would be taking focus due to the microphone. You can also do that as well. So on to the next question. Is there more information available about the platforms that will be used during IWF Connect? Today, no is the short answer, but it's coming very soon. They're going to be releasing all that information in the next week or two. And the great thing is, since WMMA and WMIA put on IWF together, we will be helping to facilitate putting some of that information out there as well. And the JTC will be helping with that. So right now, there really is just the website, iwfconnect.com. And you can go there, but it's a pretty short website. But very soon, in the next week or two, you should start getting some information coming out about that. I don't see any other chats coming in. I will give it a couple more seconds here to see if anybody has any last minute chats or questions. And otherwise, I'll hand it over to Jason for the wrap up.
Thank you all so much. First, I'd like to thank these presenters that are in front of you, plus Larry and Samantha. Throwing this together was good. I know it was kind of last minute, changed a lot of our topics around everything that's going on, and we hope that this was helpful. It was definitely requested quite a bit. So we threw that together, and we really require your direction so that we know where to go. When Jeff and I are interested in some piece of tech, we just go look it up for ourselves. And so we really need you guys to tell us where you want us to take you. So we require that survey, and we really need it. And I'd like to welcome the two of our newest members here, Brendan and Stephen, two of our newest members of the committee, and they're already contributing to the event. So thank you guys for that. And you guys have a great weekend.